Hello and welcome to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. This is your host, Ashley from Ashley Taylor Wellness. On this podcast, we talk about all things beauty, health, wellness, and optimization. Being a high maintenance hippie represents not being boxed in, as I strongly believe that one size does not fit all. I'm a nurse turned coach, and I have learned so much about both conventional and alternative options, and I want to help you expand your options. I'm here to inspire you to learn new ways to improve your quality of life and to take your power back. I'm so excited that you're here, so let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. I'm very excited for today's guest. Her name is Kim Sadaji, and we have known each other on Instagram for a while. Her Instagram is Kim the Counselor. She has been a counselor in Arizona for 17 years. She's a wife, mother, and currently an empty nester. She's also a fellow biohacker and has a private practice here in Scottsdale, and her focus is on counseling, consulting, and integrative mental health. She has 2 dogs, loves cooking, and we have a shared passion for coffee enemas. So I'm really excited to have you here, and let's get started. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Ashley, for having me. I'm super excited about the podcast, and I have to say I've been playing it in my head for a couple of days, so I'm excited to see how it just transitions and flows from what was in my head to what we're about to explore today.
Well, this is your first podcast, right?
It is. And I feel like everyone can remember that first, like their first kiss, their first turkey they cook at Thanksgiving. And now it's like the first podcast. I'll always remember it. And I appreciate the generosity to inviting me on.
Of course. I think that mental health is something I'm very passionate about because of my own experience as the patient, but also as the nurse, seeing a lot of people who did not get their needs met. There's a saying that you don't care how much someone knows until you know how much they care. And I think that is really true. There's an element of I'm up here and you're down here of separation. And I think more humanity and more connection seems to really facilitate a better experience while also remaining professional. So I'm really interested to hear your take on a lot of things. And how did you decide to become a therapist and a counselor?
Well, long story very short, my undergraduate was in business and accounting and a minor in Spanish, and then got married and had a kiddo and decided that 9-to-5 kind of high-powered corporate career, I was in corporate America before, wasn't really going to work with what we wanted and what we designed for our own family with our family values and just kind of how we set up the structure. So I wanted to be able to stay at home with my son and raise him. I went back when he was 2 to get my master's in clinical psychology. And it was good because if I'm addicted to anything, it might be learning. Yeah. So it was really kind of fun to learn about humanity, about, developmental stages and all of that at a time in my life where I was relatively newly married, had, past career and a new mom. So it really was a good fit. Even in the business side, I was more attracted to the human or the interaction. So I thought it'd be a good fit and something that I could develop and grow inside of our family, be able to do it part-time. When we became empty nesters, do more. I just felt like it was going to be a better fit. So I don't regret it. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of things that I wouldn't want as a therapist and things that I wanted, took from education to put into what I feel like is really important. On a side note, as a therapist, doing that and getting licensed and getting trained and keeping everything up with continuing ed, that's a piece of it. But the other piece for me as a therapist, what I would look for in a therapist as well is like, what kind of life experience have they lived? Is the person relatable? I love the quote, people don't care until they know you care type of thing. Clinically, we would say that is building the bridge of the therapeutic relationship. And before you kind of go in and dissect and figure out all of these different things, if that bond, if that relationship doesn't create a foundation and you're not building that throughout the whole process, therapy at least will be not as effective, but could be kind of null and void if that relationship, the bond of the therapeutic relationship isn't there.
Definitely. The rapport. And even as a coach, it's the same thing. Very different roles, but both are supportive. And if someone feels judged, if someone feels unsafe, then they're probably not going to open up. And I always am willing to share on Instagram because I want to bring the humanity back. As a nurse, I felt that I had to keep it very closed. You want to be professional, of course. But I think what has really helped people and what has helped me is seeing real humans going through the thick of it and how they handle it and the resilience that is demonstrated. And it's great to have someone that is holding space for you and asking the right questions, but I do not feel that I'm getting the most out of it if I don't feel like they care and if they're truly listening and if they're just, looking down at their piece of paper and making a bunch of notes. You want to feel that connection so that you can really open up.
Absolutely. I have a question on, I have a really significant intake process.
Yeah.
I probably irritate my clients before they start. They're like, enough with the paperwork. I just wanted to check like the boxes that I understand what HIPAA is. And for me, it's like therapy starts before the first session. I want to be understanding and prepared like the minute that, the person comes on the video conference, because right now I'm doing telehealth, and I want to understand like and get some direction. And also too, when we organize our thoughts and our feelings, and we can kind of understand some of the things that we want to work on or work towards, or things that maybe are bothering us. So the first question actually is, besides how did you find me,
Yeah.
is what are you looking for in a therapist? So if I were to just ask you that question, Ashley, what would you be looking for in a therapist? What qualities?
Someone where I feel safe to share what I'm really thinking, someone who does not pressure me to think or do what they ask of me, someone who is okay with me disagreeing, and someone who respects my right to autonomy. That is the most important thing for me.
Awesome. Sounds like you have some good boundaries too.
Yes. Now I do, not before.
Great boundaries.
No way.
I'll say just in general, I hear very similar, but but I think 99 out of the last 100 intakes or new clients I've had, I think it would be, I want someone who listens to me.
Yes.
Okay. For me as a therapist, I think that's kind of like the bare minimum. Like, I mean, that's kind of what we're paid to do.
Right.
We should, like, that should be expected. But I think maybe what some of the clients are really saying is someone that has the capacity to understand.
Yes, definitely.
And with that comes like the education and life, together. And I think when we develop ourselves as therapists and keep working in both of those dynamics of life strategies and skills and therapeutic training and teachings and all of that. But at the core, I think we just want to be heard and not judged and feeling like we're understood.
Definitely.
And that's kind of the basis. Then from there, we can start working on like the interventions and strategies and some of that. But that definitely is, I think, the biggest thing that people say, clients say. And then I would say, if they've been in therapy, don't want to like talk poorly about anyone, but also not wanting to reinvent the wheel. So it's like, what worked for you before? What maybe didn't work? What did you like? What did you not like? So I can kind of get a strategy, because it's really more about directing and leading in the style. I think there's a therapeutic style in the style the client needs. So if you're able to like come to this table and then match, maybe some clients are more serious, maybe they need, they need a little bit of humor, maybe, all of those different things. So if you can kind of understand that and then come to the table stylistically what meets their needs, and then also be able to kind of throw some things in and push the envelope a little bit. I like to do that with humor in therapy. I've seen on Instagram when you've posted like, what's a good comedy show? I think humor is one of the most underrated therapeutic strategies of all times. Like it's really good. But as a therapist, I think if you can work on style and being able to add a little bit of humor, it goes a long, long way in the counseling process.
Yeah. Do you find that the majority of the clients or patients that you work with are dealing with a significant issue? What do you see the most in the clients that you're working with?
I think right now, and we'll probably get into this a little bit more if we were just to use like kind of buzzwords, I think most people will say like, I'm depressed, or I'm feeling depressed, or I'm anxious, or those are kind of the easy words to grab onto. So, but when we peel away some of the layers, what do I see a lot is isolation and not being connected in what I identify as like the pillars, like the 4, 5, 6 pillars of counseling. So when we go through the intake form and kind of understand where people sit there, what we want to do is identify those things. It's on Instagram, but it's when the person's pretending to be a therapist and they're like, and the client goes, I'm so depressed. And the therapist asks, like, are you eating good? Then the person's like, no. Are you sleeping? No. Do you have social connection? No. Are you working? No. Are you? Every answer is no. Are you scrolling, doom scrolling? Yes. Or that would be a yes. All of these things. And it's like, and why are we depressed? Or why are we anxious? Or why do we feel disconnected? So it really, really isn't rocket science. It's about starting truly at the basics and then making small changes. And as we get more successes, then we can continue to also weave in the psychological part as well. But if we only work on the basics, then we might miss that component. Or if we're just like, tell me about your childhood,
Yeah.
that's all we talk about for, 2 years. It's about really an interplay of both, I think.
That is so funny you mentioned that reel because I actually have it saved as the next one to make, but it is really true.
Yeah.
And so, what are the pillars of counseling? There are 5 pillars of functional medicine coaching, and let's see what aligns. So, those would be sleep and restoration, exercise and movement, nutrition, stress, and relationships.
Okay.
Stress and relationships, most would not think have much to do with health. So, what would you say the pillars of counseling would be?
I would say all of those. And then I do add in spirituality. And it's
Okay.
not saying like, oh, what religion are you? And I'm this religion and like indoctrination. It's more on a spiritual level of what people are believing or if they're needing more or want to explore, more esoteric, existential. And I think therapy can open up a space if someone is struggling with those types of thoughts and themes. So I like that because I think before a long, long time ago, we used to say the body. And then the woo woo new agers was like the mind body connection. And then there was this thing, are they connected? Does it exist? And now everyone's pretty much accepted and believes that like there is a mind body connection. And I think where we're really moving beyond that is the mind body spirit. We are spiritual beings really having a human experience. So if we're too afraid to talk or to open the door or the space to talking about that, if the client wants to. It's not like this topic driven thing, but I think we have to be comfortable in being able to address that and look at it not as a way of like judgment or indoctrination, but as a way for a person to explore for
Yes.
personal growth.
Yeah. And not everyone has the capacity to sit with someone who is really feeling their feels, whether that is experiencing anxiety or extreme sadness. And a lot of people will say, it's okay, get over it, or it's okay, it's not that bad. And I think that they're trying to help, but not everyone has the ability to sit with someone in that. And where I first really grasped that concept was Kelly Brogan a few years ago said, that she became a psychiatrist because she wanted to fix women. And it did feed a piece of her ego in the sense that I am the one with the solutions and all of that. And she realized that it was hard for her to experience people struggling. And
Mhm.
so for me, it's really important that I can have that in therapy or in whatever work that I'm doing where it's safe to let that out. But I also understand that not everyone has the ability to do that. And that's why it is really helpful to work with a professional because family members or loved ones, it doesn't mean that you're broken or crazy. They just might not have the tools to sit with that. So what do you think about that?
I think the first thing is it's instinct when someone's hurting to like not want to see them suffer.
Yeah.
So the idea would be like we all have this drive to not want to see someone suffer. And so to say like look at not in so many words, but the idea would be like look at the bright side, there's always tomorrow. Really that encapsulates helping the person understand to still have hope. Okay.
Okay.
And I think that's missing a lot, the idea of hope. But to just say, like, oh, get over it, or look at the bright side, or it's not so bad, or other people have it worse, that would be what we use in the clinical term as minimizing. So we don't want to fall victim to that. And not that therapists are perfect all the time, but it's this balance that we need to really recognize the words that we say. It's not that we're powerful, but the words that we say have power in that moment and have meaning. So to try to be as careful and conscious as you possibly can be. I've had a lot of people come to me and say, several people, not, say like, I remember when I was in junior high and a therapist told me this, and it just sticks. We all have those moments when things stick. And so I really try to be conscious of that. I try to like come to each session with clean energy and really be super focused. And the other part is I wrote down a note, hot mess. Okay. So
Okay.
we all know kind of or have a vision of that. Okay, now I'm going to kind of throw the doctors under the bus, but like that ER doctor that's like super overweight and like, smoking like a chimney outside the ER bay as like the next person comes in. And it's like, okay, do I really feel in alignment
Right.
with taking health advice with someone, no judgment, but with someone that maybe is a hot mess in that area in their
Hmm.
life? And so I'm not saying my life is perfect. Goodness gracious, it's far from perfect. But I try very, very hard to uphold the things that, the quote unquote advice or prescriptions or, the routines that we work with clients. Like I try to make sure I'm doing those things or playing around with those ideas and seeing if things work or seeing if they don't. Even with supplements, I've never recommended a supplement I haven't taken myself. I don't know if a doctor could say like, I've never recommended a psych med I haven't been on for 6 months myself,
Oh
like
gosh, yeah.
that's to say. So I feel like it's really important to try to keep on keeping our side of the street clean so we're not coming to therapy messy, you
Mhm.
know. Not we're not perfect, so the perfection isn't the thing, but we're doing the work, whatever that looks like in our lives. So I think when we're not doing the work, we kind of come from a knee-jerk reaction where it's like the minimizing or the this or the that. Sometimes a client just needs to hear that freaking sucks. Like
Right.
that
Yeah.
literally is hard. And when some things are like super hard, I'll say that is like tremendously hard. And I don't know, like you might not feel like you're doing really good right now. I don't even know how you're doing as good as you're doing right now because what you're going through is so difficult. And that goes back to the Rogerian theories of some of the things that I was trained in pretty significantly for my master's, the idea of acceptance, empathetic, but authentic empathetic responding. That can sometimes go just as long as like, oh, why don't you try this new intervention?
Right. It's really interesting because I think you can validate someone's feelings and their experience. And just like you said, wow, that really does suck. And what would feel best, moving forward? Maybe not in that same sentence, but I think sometimes people just want to skip to the intervention or how to make it better without honoring this is where I am. This is the feeling that I have. And when people don't know what to do with it, it's like, okay, well, how can we fix it? Versus what is this teaching me? What is the lesson? And I think that's something that you also try to look at. Like life, one of the things is life is an experiment. So I definitely look at life in that way now, even with my Oura ring and the data. I'm like, okay, this is feedback. I am someone who has historically, over the last 20 years, dealt with depression. And we'll talk about how I word that versus I am depressed and all of that. But it's very interesting because when I get to that place of being in a state of feeling depressed, I don't see it as a failure or anything. I look at back to the pillars. Have I done the foundational things that I need to fill my cup? And it is, of course, lifestyle, but stress in relationships play such a big role. And I think the importance of inflammation and methylation have really been a huge connection in that state. So instead of it being a failure or I'm broken, which is what I used to believe, I'm like, interesting. So what could be contributing to this? And that seems to take away any of the stigma that I felt before. It's curiosity versus judgment of self.
Yeah, and I think too, when we have data, it allows us to have an opportunity to have control over changing some things.
Mhm.
So it's like, okay, maybe you had a bad night sleeping or whatever it might be. And it's like, oh, you could really beat yourself up over that data and saying, like, oh, I'm not doing this good enough, or I haven't got my steps in, or my sleep's been really poor, all of those different things. But to say, like, to reframe and think about, well, it's data, it's powerful data. And guess what? Now that I know it, like in my conscious mind, I can actually make some changes. And
Mhm.
so sometimes the stuff that we're, we're sucking at the most out of, like the internal dialogue, can be the most exciting things that we can actually have power over changing. I love this metaphor. A long time ago, it was a spiritual mentor of mine, and we were talking about challenges. And he was stating, like, you think about like babies, right? And how would a baby be able to actually crawl, sit up, or walk if they weren't going against that challenge? So the baby that's like just learning to like push him or herself over, they have that frustration look, and they have their hands, on the crib, and they're kind of go. So if we wouldn't have had that inner fire to like see the challenge and push against it, lean into it, and try to accomplish what we want on the other side, like that's innate. That's kind of wired in all of us. We'd all be sitting in a crib, with a diaper on still. So when we see that, we think, oh my gosh, that is so amazing, as we see our children unfold that way, and we see all the physical developmental milestones unfolding. But it's the same thing on a mental health level. There's challenges that we have to push against. There's things that are going to feel uncomfortable, whether it's like heartbreak or heartache, or what we consider like not getting the job or failure, or whatever it might be. But if we don't go through those things, we're just going to be like sitting and never learning how to roll over, crawl, and walk. So to go back to the Kelly Brogan statement, sometimes suffering can be hard to watch, but when we understand the value of it, then it's kind of like, oh gosh, this is kind of cool. Like there's some stuff here that can actually be life-changing. In the moment, it can still hurt like heck.
Right.
But I would challenge, your listeners to think about some of the things that have caused them to grow the most, or made the most, or made that decision, or chose to do something outside the box, whether it's like moving across the country, or starting a new relationship, or starting whatever it might be. And a lot of times it comes from the challenges that push us to do the things.
Definitely. That is very applicable for leaving nursing. I was in the hospital for 10 years, and there was a piece of me that didn't feel fully aligned with it, but I thought that was the best way to help people. And there was this conflict that did create some frustration and anger. But in the end, it was really the fuel for what allowed me to put my energy and heart into something else that is much better in alignment for me. I feel I'm able to help people on a deeper level. So maybe if we change the meaning of challenges and reframe, then that can be really powerful, because sometimes we just see something as, well, this must mean because I'm facing a challenge, it's not possible for me, and people will stop and then give up, when maybe the meaning is something a little bit different, and there's a lesson in there. And how we view things, the lens through which we see the world, is really powerful. So what do you think about that lens, and how it's shaped? How is that lens shaped for people?
Well, I like the question. I'm going to take it in the direction of how we see things and how the lens can be shaped are many different ways, but one in particular, one theory or technique that I like to use really is our subconscious conscious belief structure. So sometimes we can see things, well, this, like even being raised in the same family, we all see our parents different. And sometimes talking to a sibling, it might be like, did you have the same parents that I had? Did you live in the same house? It's a lot about built on perception. And some of our thoughts and beliefs really come from an idea of conscious, subconscious belief structure. In the subconscious, let's just say theory, the idea of the subconscious, our subconscious is believed to be formed between the age of like birth, maybe some will say before that, okay, and 5, 6, 7. Okay, so you think about how we're taking in the world with even our brain not even developed and a limited amount of experiences at that time. All of these things are forming belief structures. I love to use metaphors. I need to update this metaphor, but I was back in the day of CDs, so tapes and CDs. So if you think of a CD player, to have a song on it, multiple songs, but let's just say one song. So you have an experience, and that becomes like a song that's just playing and playing and playing. Then you have another experience and another song. All of these collections are subconscious beliefs.
Right.
What you tend to do then is to take those beliefs, right, in order to hold them near and dear and to keep the music keep playing. What we'll do is we'll take experiences in our current state and correlate those to our past beliefs. So it's like, yeah, see, this always happens. Whenever I go to a place, people are always rude or whatever it might be, whatever the beliefs are, if we're unlovable or not smart enough, or see, I didn't get the job, I'm always a failure. And a lot of times when I'm working with a client, they'll talk about something and I'm like, boom, there it is. There's the belief. Okay.
Yep.
And then what we try to do then is to go back to the past and figure out, let's talk about, there's all these different things like core memories or whatever, but memories and trying to get back to when did that first start? And just having that aha moment of being able to do that whole process, be like, that's what it is. And then I had this and this and this and this that reinforced, and all these other things in life that maybe weren't quite reinforcing it, but kind of could look like it. I correlated all those back to, because we also have a tendency to look through our lens and see things in a way that we want to correlate it back to, yeah, I know, see, this is how it always is, that familiarity. So is it true and authentic, or are we kind of morphing it to correlate back to the subconscious beliefs? So once we can kind of start to identify, and that is it's fun to play around with that, with the beliefs, and see, then these magical moments happen, like these aha, oh my gosh, I never thought of it that way. Wow. And many of the aha moments, I think, in therapy I've seen over being on this side are when I actually slowly repeat what a client has just told me. They're like, and they sit back and they go, whoa. But that process of being able to get back to that really is what shapes our lens. Then fast forward, if we can work on a different thought or belief structure, right? It's not like we can just say like this affirmation 100 times and we're going to change, but we look at creating a different belief structure. And then what we got to do is go out and do the stuff, right? Go out and do the activities, go out and do the living, go out and walk on the journey and start creating new experiences to tie to this new belief.
Yes.
Okay. Because we can't just change the belief like that, but we've got to start. And then sometimes I have clients that are doing things and they're not even tying them to that new belief. And so then we practice, like, to see how you had this and then you did this and see that's a new song that's playing now. And you're doing that. You're tying, you work on tying it to the belief. So that's a big thing. I think rather than looking at it a lens, I kind of dissect on a different level and look at it as conscious, subconscious, and then the work funnels into more of a CBT strategy when we're learning and breaking certain things down and then creating new behaviors.
Yeah, the beliefs, even as a coach, the things I ask everyone on week 1 to write down all the beliefs that tell you that the change that you want to make is going to be challenging or maybe even not possible for you. And it's really interesting because I try to explain it as an inner conflict. If one piece of you wants to make $200,000 a year, but another piece of you believes that money is for greedy, rich a-holes, it's not going to be aligned. And a good example for me, when I was very young, probably the age of 11, I was very promiscuous. I did a lot of things voluntarily, although I don't know how much you can consent at that age, but either way, I was playing and doing all these things. And when I got old enough to realize, oh, that is not respectful of myself, I've already blown it, no good man's going to love me, I had very low self-worth. The view that I had of myself shaped the types of relationships that I was available for moving forward. And that is not the case anymore. But I had to go back to my beliefs and the identity and really look at where those beliefs came from and ask, okay, maybe I don't snap my fingers and overnight I'm a new person, but who would I like to become? What beliefs am I learning to embody? And 20 years ago, I was asked to say, I totally and completely love and accept myself. And I couldn't get behind it. But today, just like with affirmations, you don't just say it and you believe it. I do think that it's helpful for me to say, I am learning to totally and completely love and accept myself. Like that doesn't feel like BS to me. But yeah, if affirmations and the beliefs are not in the direction that we want to go, we'll find evidence of that being true. Whatever we believe, we're going to find evidence of that being true. So I used to think I was a floozy high school dropout. I now believe and live my life as a high value woman. And I think, how would a high value woman treat herself, treat others? What would I tolerate? What would I accept? What is the best version of me? And I slowly practice becoming that version of myself. and who we are is learned, right? So we can also relearn.
Really two good points. The first thing is this kind of all or nothing thinking. So
Yeah.
like we've blown it, or it's really that dark side of thinking where it's all or nothing. And early on, as a mom, I try to embrace this mantra like everything's fixable. Okay. So the kid, breaks the toy and you just, okay, it's okay. Everything's fixable. Either, it's fixable in fixing the toy. Maybe you replace it. Maybe you don't. Maybe the fix is the lesson that you learn when something, it maybe isn't exactly like, okay, it's just replaceable, going to be the exact same thing. But we can literally, and when we believe like literally we can fix this and we can do that, it changes. But I'm going to give you like some serious credit here where you didn't give yourself credit. Okay.
Okay.
I love your Instagram. I've been a huge, I'll tell you what, I've been completely inspired by the things that you post, and I love your transparency. But I've been this person in the sidelines cheering because I'm like, you go, like even the ups and downs. I love the transparency, but the cheering comes from the doing. And you literally have done the stuff. And so when I see the progress and the things that you're reporting on, like, okay, I've done this and now I'm doing this, it's like, yeah, you're going to get where you want to be and you're going to feel the successes because you're thinking in a different way, but you're actually doing the things. Everything from like the coffee enema to the working out to the conversations you have with your partner, all of those things, the supporting your friends, the getting out of the house, the checking in, like, am I in too much? Do I need to get out? Or am I having enough fun? All of those things. So you're measuring, and it doesn't stop there. So you've had the aha moment. You've recreated the conscious thinking around it, the consciousness, and then you've integrated the doing part. And that's when we really feel the whole effect of that change process. So don't ever underestimate the doing. And the doing, I would say, for me personally as a therapist, there are certain accountants that I follow, yours being one on the top 10, 100% top 10. And some of the accounts I follow are just for me to see the routines that they're keeping to inspire me either to do the same routines or different ones, but the accountability that someone else is having is inspiring. And so I love that part of your journey that you show that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I feel now at 36 years old that God gave me the life that I had with the challenges that I had so that I could go through it. And I hope that being transparent shows people I don't have it all figured out, nor am I perfect, but I've certainly progressed. I'm not anywhere near as reactive as I used to be. I'm so much more secure in myself. And I would have just accepted this is who I am. I'm broken. I'm depressed. This is, once again, who I am. And the language, the story that we're telling is really powerful. So, just like you mentioned before, sometimes clients or patients will say something and you repeat it back. And they might be a little surprised at the story they're telling themselves. And so I like to say to myself and to others, don't believe everything that you think, because where might some of these negative or limiting beliefs come from? Why might the brain deliver those types of message to a person?
So where they might come from, like you said, is kind of our history, but the idea would be really to just start practicing not telling ourselves things that we would ever tell someone else.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. Sometimes we tell her, when I work with moms, I say, would you ever tell your kid that? And they're like, way, and so it's like to work on thinking about not telling ourselves things. And or if we say that and they say, okay, now I'm going to have to go say that to someone else, it kind of stops you in your tracks thinking, okay, this is just not cool to say to myself anymore. But a lot of times we've got to couple that into the actions to literally feel the difference. And it's exciting to be a part of that journey, to watch other people. I think there's this big idea like, does therapy work? Or I might see a client for the first time and they say, I tried therapy and it didn't work. Then we go and we discuss like, well, what do you mean it didn't work? What parts didn't work for you? Maybe what parts were you not working as well? What were your expectations? Did you expect like meeting someone and talking with them for like an hour once a month or every other week was going to fix all of these problems? So I really view therapy as an active process, but that's an extension of how we live our life. The more productive and active and engaged we are in life, the better we feel. The same with therapy. When we're engaging being productive and doing the homework and trying the things and readjusting, the more productive therapy will be as well.
Do you give homework to your clients? Because a lot of therapists do not.
I do. I give
Okay.
homework at times when it makes sense. I call it the piano teacher theory. I used to play piano like as a kid through high school. And then when you don't practice, then you're like, Mom, I don't feel good today. Can you call Mrs. So and so and tell her I can't come to lessons? And it's about like the embarrassment or the shame or the not wanting to face when you don't do the things that you say you're going to do or you
Mhm.
should do, right? So I don't want to give too much homework where it feels like piano piano teacher theory where it's like, okay, person doesn't want to come to the lesson because they feel like they haven't done it or they're a failure. But even that is room for discussion.
Right.
But I also don't think therapy is, although best girlfriends or friends have their time and place, but it's not just a chit chat session of just kind of like dumping, unloading, and reliving. When people are ready, we really want to make progress. And homework can simply be just like doing the things. Like it might be like, okay, if a person comes and says, like, I have anxiety, then let's work on tracking it.
When you are in a therapy session or even on a coaching call, I tell my clients that's not where the change occurs. That's a great place to come up with a game plan, to gather awareness, to look at the patterns. And I use Oura Ring with my clients for lifestyle. But also now we can see stress, we can see recovery. So it's super cool. But what are the patterns? And I always tell people, please show up whether you do the things or not, because sometimes people don't do things because they're afraid, well, what if I don't do it correctly? Or anything like that. So I say always show up. You can't mess it up if you're honest and you're willing to grow. But it's not, people think that therapy and coaching, the change happens on the call. And I would say it's the moments in between and what you're actually able to implement. So it sounds like the homework would be things that people can implement to therefore change the issues that they're coming in with when they're at the appointment.
I couldn't have said it better myself. That's
Okay.
exactly, it really encapsulates it. Absolutely. And I love that you use an Oura ring. I wish I could say, like, if a person wants to be in counseling, it's a requirement to have an Oura ring because the amount of data, and you can go, you know this from using it in your coaching, you can go light, you can go surface level, and you can go to the nitty gritty, and you can really go deep. And that's
Mhm.
all about a timing where someone's at. But to just get started and have that to measure. I mean, I look at it, and I'm not in like in traditional medicine, but I look at it like as how do you know someone's blood pressure if you don't take it? How do you
Mhm.
know, someone's if they have a broken bone or not if you can't scan it or x-ray it? Those types of things. It's like it's the best measuramental reading we have at this moment in time that you and I have seen that seems the safest to start measuring some of these things and utilizing the data.
Definitely. I mean, for my mental health, I no longer identify as I am depressed. What do you think about labeling? And it can be helpful to have a diagnosis to understand, okay, people who deal with this cluster of symptoms, these are the things that can be helpful. But what might be a con to labeling? And how is it different in mental health versus physical health in some ways?
Okay. So I think for mental health, a lot of times the tradition is to say exactly what you said. I am, whether it's I am bipolar or I am ADHD or I am, depressed, all of those things. And we don't run around always on the physical side and say, like, I am diabetes, I am heart disease, I am cancer. We would be like, that's weird. But we somehow encompass a label, a cluster of symptoms that years ago, and it's really kind of questionable how everything came about with the DSM, decided that these are clusters and these are normal now and not normal now. And as time goes on, certain things are in, certain things are out. It's very, very, let's just say, subjective at the basic level. Okay. And so sometimes it feels nice to sit to be like, oh, other people experience that, right? It's a level of identification, inclusion, understanding. Even when we tell a story, sometimes we have this idea of saying, like, me too, I did that too, or it happened,
Yeah.
that happened to me too. It feels good to have people identify. But there's a dark side of that as well. To identify with something that's considered a disease, if you even believe in the labeling of the disease process. So I think, to me, on surface, it can give potentially a sense of comfort But long term, there's a lot more downside to identifying with a label and saying that's who we are. I'm going to say that I have been a huge fan recently of Dr. McFillin, McFillin. He is a psychologist that I believe is out there right now in the front lines, saying a lot of things in a very academic, intellectual, and scientifically backed way that many of us, therapists and counselors and psychologists, might have been thinking inside our own little, tunnels or in our own little practices, inside the walls of our own practice. And he is challenging some of the status quo as far as beliefs in labeling, beliefs in psychotropic medications, and all of that. I love to listen to things that challenge some of the beliefs and things that we've been told that we just always believe as therapists, and the idea of psychology, therapy, and psychiatry. I think he has some really interesting stuff out there right now. So he's a great podcast. Radically genuine. Yeah.
Podcast. Okay.
It's nice to hear that other people are challenging some of the constructs around labeling. And I probably feel like I, reside in that camp as well. It's good to challenge, because when we hold on to something, especially if it might be negative cluster of symptoms, hold that on and integrate that to the personhood of who we are. I mean, like you said, you might have been diagnosed with something super young. Can you imagine a lifetime of believing that's actually who you are?
Most people do. And I did for so long. Yes. It really changed my life when a psychiatrist told me that you're not broken or crazy. And based on some of the things that you experienced, it makes sense you would have this reaction. And as you're able to heal and work through these things, you may not respond in the same way. And it was the first time that it was a possibility that I could improve my coping skills and I could live a life without medication for emotional regulation and things like that. But before that, it wasn't even a possibility. So why would I put my energy towards something that's not even possible?
And that's the other thing too, when we think of either a label or a medication or whatever it might be, it's like, here, this is who you are and this is who you will be for a lifetime, or this is a pill that you need and you're going to have to take this every day to quote unquote be normal. And that's, I think, the challenge too. So I don't get too much into the medication side because I don't prescribe. So I really believe in staying, in my wheelhouse. But what I do challenge is when clients or patients are coming to me, I have them write down a list of everything they're taking, supplements and prescriptions. And it's like, I have, I think 4 or 5 questions for each medication. When did you start? How long have you been on it? Who's managing it? What is it supposed to help with? Have you noticed differences? And what are the quote unquote side effects that are reported from taking this medication? Not if they've experienced them, but I want them to go and Google or look up what they're taking and what the side effect is. So many times we don't know what, and I don't like the word side effect. I'm using that just to kind of relate, but really it's an effect. It's not something to decide. Sometimes certain things that we take or that we do, even behaviorally, affect us just as much as like the intervention or the strategy might be. And a lot of times people will put together, oh man, I didn't realize, maybe this is something that says that it's a side effect, and maybe, I'm going to use your word, not crazy. Maybe I'm just experiencing, this piece of this.
Right.
And so I really believe in you too. I know you sit on the side of the camp of not judging others and letting people come where they're at and having it be a space where they are just accepted and validated where they're at, and then also work on challenging and growth. But when we sit and we say, okay, let me be informed about everything I'm doing so I can get a bigger idea or understanding of maybe why I'm feeling this way, then we don't go to that pop psych level of, oh, I'm crazy, or this is just who I am, or it's biology, or it's my genes, or my brain is broken, or I have something missing. All of those things that people say. When we start to put together the bigger picture, we recognize how so far from accurate that really is.
Yeah. And do you think that the feedback example that I shared about depression is something that you've seen? Because what I mean by that is when I'm experiencing that outcome or those feelings, I really look at my input. Well, have I been sleeping? Have I been getting enough sun? Have I been nurturing myself, spending time with people that I love? And if my input hasn't been supportive, then I'm not going to be too surprised that what I'm feeling is not so great. So what do you think about that?
I think you're spot on. A lot of the diagnoses in the DSM really, I think, should be leaned on towards more of a rule out. Okay. So take depression for an example. a person gets no sleep. They're maybe in real
Mhm.
poor environment, everything from like maybe dysfunctional relationship to abuse, anything in between. Okay, so poor sleep, poor social connection. They're eating like crap, right? Eating fast food or eating in their car or, you know, eating pre-made meals at Trader Joe's. No offense to Trader Joe's, but like processed stuff like that. And you like, do we really have depression, or do we just have a series of inputs that are going to make us feel like crap? You
Yeah.
know. So then there's a medication, right? So we pop a pill for depression, but like when we're still not eating and we're not sleeping and all of those things, like what are we going to expect? So I like to kind of start with starting at the roots. Let's start making those changes and see, okay, when we start integrating those changes. But I literally give me, bad meals. I don't know. Do you hear me on this one? Give me poor meals, crappy food for 3 days, and not sleeping. Uh, You could probably check me in somewhere. I would feel like
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel
Yeah.
good. I wouldn't be responding or reacting or receiving quote unquote normal like a couple of days. And man, and part of it is to have empathy for where we're at in the inputs. Many times in 2007, 2008, when the economy was tanking and it was just a really, really tough economic time, counseling went up. People would come in and say, I'm so depressed. And behind I'm saying, you need a job. You know, who wouldn't feel depressed, quote unquote, depressed right now? Where people are struggling, no income, no job, can't support
Mhm.
family, house, all of those things. Now, is that clinical in the way that a person's brain is broken and there's like neurology that's bad and things that are missing? Or is it environmental factors that
Right.
are creating a human natural response?
Yeah. And I will always respect whatever is right for another person. I don't know when you found my Instagram account. Was it in 2020 or after that?
Maybe even earlier than that.
And I'd love to even discuss that whole time and some of the effects about that. But I will always respect someone's right to autonomy. If you want to take something, not take something, that is between you and your doctor or your provider. I don't get to make that decision for someone. And that's why when you asked me earlier, what's most important in a provider is that they respect my right to autonomy. And so many people don't want to take an active role in their health because then we have to take responsibility, or maybe they don't know how, they haven't seen it done before. But I find it so empowering that what I do does either support or take away from the quality of my mental health. So instead of seeing that as a huge responsibility, I'm like, how amazing that I do have a lot more control than I realized over a lot of these things.
Yeah, I loved what you were talking about back then. I don't even know how we like phrase, what do we call it? The C years? I don't know
Yeah.
what's okay. During those times, everybody's experience clearly was different, probably depending on where you were living, what your household was like, how old you were, those types of things. Things closed down, schools closed down, universities closed down. But what I am noticing now, and frontline, maybe I would say would be the mental health professionals noticing this. Okay. What we're noticing with people that are struggling is the idea that the world was closed down, whether it physically was or psychologically was.
Right.
And I call it COVID crib. Okay. It's like
Yeah.
working with high school students, college students, young adults, if they were put in a crib. The side of the crib is a mom, you know what that's like when you pull it up and it clicks into place and then you close the door. And they were put in that crib mentally, sometimes physically, for 3 years. Then the lights come on, nap time's over, and it's like, okay, come out now. If we put a
Mhm.
baby in a crib at an infant and say 3 years later, you should know how to sit up, roll over, crawl, walk, feed yourself. 3 years in infancy is tremendous. You can't do that and expect the same things. But we only look at it through the lens of physical. Okay.
Mhm.
Mental health wise, mentally, we have developmental stages, and it's hit different sections of the population, age group wise, in different ways. Especially young adults, they'll say, can you imagine being first year in university and it closing, and then all of a sudden you're supposed to be a junior on campus? I mean, you've missed all of that, whether it's like the social structure, living in a dorm, being away, creating friendships, relationships, internship, whatever it might be. And all of a sudden, junior year. And same thing, kids have graduated, and it's like I feel like I've missed those first 3 years. And the 20 sums feel like they're 16, 17, 18, 19, as far as the experiences that they have not had. And so really the wave of those years,
Mhm.
in my humble opinion, is not about the cooties, it's not about people are embracing anxiety or fear from a germ, but it's from shutting down the world and having developmental stages significantly impaired, if not lost.
Definitely. I mean, that was exactly what I was advocating for. Just like you said in 2008, how could a person thrive if they're not allowed to work and feed their family? How can a person be healthy if they're living in poverty? You know,
Mhm.
poverty that they're kind of forced into. Because if you are compromised and you need to stay home, I fully supported people's right to do that. But if you were willing to work, and that's what you need to do to be able to take care of yourself, then why can't people do that? And I just felt that it was so psychologically damaging. And that's why I never said, this is what you should do, or this is what you should do. I feel that it is essential. I went back to work in the hospital for 9 months and I wanted to see who was getting sick. And it was also very interesting because isolation is a huge theme. And those patients were put into isolation for weeks at a time.
Mhm.
And the only people that come in are people like myself dressed like Darth Vader, with the full gear and everything. And you're in this dark room. And a lot of the patients, I felt like what I was able to do the most for them, that was the most beneficial, wasn't necessarily even giving them a medication, oxygen if they needed it for sure. But it was asking them, when you get out of here, what are you looking forward to? And sometimes they were scared that they wouldn't even make it out. Like they were so alone with their thoughts in a dark, empty room, no family, totally isolated. And what does isolation do to a person's mental health and possibly even physical health?
Well, I think there's just a one word answer. I mean, death. We die inside physically and spiritually, mentally. We're not created to living in isolation. And
Mhm.
isolation does drive fear. I didn't tell you this, but when COVID quote unquote hit,
Yeah.
uh, we were in Japan. So I don't know if you remember when that cruise ship was docked in Japan, and that was on the news all the time if they were going to let the passengers out and how many had them, and all of the people in the spacesuits were walking in like to deliver. Do you remember that at all? Where that when that
No, I remember ships here, but not in Japan. Okay.
that was the beginning. And we had a long-term trip. It was going to be 3 to 6 months. And we decided we'd get on the plane and go. But after 1 week there, everything closed in the country. And it was the franticness of getting back on the plane and can you get back to the US and everyone is going to be okay. And we don't have anything here. And have all the numbers are in different places. There was all that franticness. So going into it, I didn't necessarily have a huge clear mind. I was really being manipulated and pulled and driven more in the fear because it was like we're going into the hot spot coming, and all of that. So it's such a tremendous amount of fear. And then when we got home and we made it home okay and the flight was okay and we were safe and everyone was healthy, I felt this tremendous responsibility to do the things right, to do the things and be good and do the things that everyone is saying you've got to do. And then I found some ideas and accounts that opened my eyes. And then also we had I had that epiphany aha breakthrough moment at home where we were doing all of the things but highly isolated, and there was just this moment. It was like we're going to all mentally lose it here,
Mhm.
or we're going to just say screw it and start getting out. And it was literally, it came down to that mental health thing, like, getting out of the house and going to the restaurant. It was like, this is a new day one and we're going to have to start living, or something really, really bad is going to happen where we're not going to be able to come back mentally wise.
Yeah.
Because
And people don't take that seriously because you can't see it in the same way.
and to have grace as well. Everyone kind of started at a different place learning that curve. And mine was a very fear-driven place because we were in Japan and things were shutting down and we were a foreigner. It was really very bizarre and difficult. But when you start to find and think about and open up to different things and different ideas, the fear starts to subside. And so I appreciate your account and many others like Yogi and
Mhm.
Alex Zek and Dr. Kaufman and even Otto, all of the different accounts that it became this bright spot this feeling of home when we were so isolated, whether it was physically, mentally. The accounts became a way of understanding and identifying with just different options.
Yeah. And I think that one size does not fit all. I think that our emotional state, our physiological state, but our state in general has an impact on our mental and physical health. So when you are in a chronic state of fear and just hypervigilance almost, what is that doing to the body? Does that induce any type of chemical response?
Well, clearly it just induces everything that we shouldn't be having in the body all the time. So fear isn't in and of itself isn't a terrible thing, right? Look at evolution. Lion, a tiger, or something in the jungle, right? And there's a predator. The wind blows a different way. There's a scent. There's a whatever. It arises that fight or flight. So you got to understand evolutionarily. Sorry about that. That part of that is for survival. So that instinct, that gut instinct, and sometimes it comes from like, I shouldn't be here. That feeling that sometimes it's driven by fear isn't necessarily a bad thing. Okay. If we didn't have that, we would be doing crazy stuff all the time. I think about kids like jumping off of this or jumping off of that, like not, getting hurt all the time, all of those things. So that idea, a little bit of healthy fear is okay.
Right.
But when we rev up the system to be in flight or fight all the time, it's just like, simple. We don't have to we can go through all the biology and the process and the hormones and all of that that's activated, but it's like, being in a car and pressing the brakes and the gas at the same time for like 10 years. What do you expect? You're going to ruin the car. You're going to burn it out. Some cars, maybe it's the engine or the carburetor, all the different parts, but you put the gas and the brakes together and pedal to the metal for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, or you're a kid and living in that environment, clearly it's going to cause breakdown.
Yeah. We know that isolation and poverty, we know that they are highly correlated with poor health outcomes. I learned that in health promotion before I ever went to nursing school. And people were sick, no doubt. What you want to call it, where it came from, I don't know. But I saw people truly struggling. And I tried to look at the themes. So who was getting sick? How strong were their relationships? What were their belief systems? How was their metabolic health? And there were themes. So I think that we underestimate the power of the state that we are in. Of course, just like you said, feel your feelings. Fear is there to protect us, but sometimes we have to hit the override button on that. And I think a lot of people are now just fearful of everything. And it has changed a lot of people's state, almost not permanently, but that seems to be more of their default. And my stance in 2020, which it is still today, is that division is a tool. How divided were people? There was so much anger and hostility, and that does affect our health. So it's important to stand up for what you believe in. But I was really mindful to say, do what is right for you and respect the decisions of others. And that was not popular to say at the time. I should have, from the one side, you should tell people not to do this. The other side, you should tell people they should. And I'm like, I don't get to make that decision for someone else. I believe that other people are strong and capable and they can think for themselves, but most people don't even believe that. Who am I to think for myself or trust myself? And it was a time where a lot of people either gave their power away or stepped into it. So there will be another thing, I think, at some point. I don't think this is the last.
I think there's already something, right?
Yeah. So for me, I am doing everything to invest in this vessel, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And what do you think for a person to be their best? And, maybe this will include some of the therapeutic techniques, but what do you think is essential for a person to prioritize to thrive, not just physically, but mentally as well in this world moving forward? What would you say that a person really should focus on for themselves?
Okay. First and foremost, the basics.
Okay.
You've got to start with the basics. We've covered it a couple of times in different ways. And I think that's because it's so important. So start with the basics. A lot of times too, I'll tell clients and sometimes people say they can't afford therapy, or they can't afford this, or they can't afford that. There are things in life that are free as well. What's free, Ashley? Sunshine,
Sleep. Yeah.
sleep, grass, Grounding, nature, walking. So if you can't do the things and spend, tremendous amount on all of the tools, okay? It doesn't have to be a tremendous, but there's so many things it could be if you wanted it to be. So many cool things out there. Start with the basics and start with free. So if you have to choose between walking and counseling, walk. Go for a walk. Go for a walk every day. There's even science behind how important walking is. We cross both left, right side of our brains. Processing becomes better. We're connected with nature, walking. So I think there's huge power in the basics, right? You don't have to pay someone to be a therapist and sit for an hour. You can start with the basics if that's where you're at. You can do the other as well, but the value is in the basics, okay? Then relationships and connections. When they're off, you cannot out sauna, you can't out supplement, a crappy environment and poor relationships or no relationships. And so sometimes it's easier, and I've been in that case too. It's like, oh, I feel this. What supplement can I take for, this, that, or the other? It's like, no, you can't outrun that. You can't out supplement that. So start next with relationships. And then, I love the hippie in you. One hippie hugging another hippie. It's like embrace the natural, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to use tools, start picking the ones in my mind that make the most sense because they are natural. There's less amount of the quote unquote side effects or effects. So start with the natural, right? And then the other part we talked about like a little bit is the spiritual side. A lot of our suffering is because we're on this journey and feeling disconnected on a spiritual level. Spiritual does not mean like you have to believe the same God I do or a certain religion or dogma. I truly believe we are spiritual beings on a human journey. So it's not about separating the spirit is this way. So a lot of times there's that esoteric journey that we're missing. But basics, okay. And then relationships, getting out of isolation, changing environment, and the spiritual journey, I think is kind of that last, what is it? Maslow's law of identification.
Hierarchy of needs.
Hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
It's been a while since I looked at that. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That self-actualization part. But wherever you're at in the journey, to really look at, and I love to think of it this way, the wise ones that went before. Right. Once again, you were one of the wise ones that went before. Hey, you're a nurse, I'm a therapist. We have different degrees, advanced degrees in different things, but I loved what you were teaching and training. So start to look for the wise ones, whether it's in your quote unquote real life IRLs, online, whatever it might be. Start looking for the ones that have gone before. What have they done? What are they doing? And look for those models.
Yes.
Same thing in relationships. When I see clients that are struggling with marriage or even people that aren't married, I say, do you know of anyone that has like a really good relationship? I mean, I could even ask you that question. Of all of the people that okay, I'm not talking about your relationship, but just looking at how many relationships would you say, dang, they've got it. They're good. They're solid. Not solid necessarily meaning not breaking up or divorcing, but what they're doing is solid. They have a solid foundation. How many would be an inspiration to you, numbers wise?
More than ever before, but I'd say before the age of 25, very few. So I didn't have an example of a relationship that I would want in my own way. So I just thought I don't want relationships. But now I'd say maybe 5 or 10, which is still a pretty small amount, but at least it shows my brain that it's possible.
Okay. So you have a lot of cool friends then, because usually I ask this question a lot. I have never in my history of asking this question for the last 17 years have heard ever anyone say more than five or 10.
I mean, this is not just in my personal life, but people
Absolutely.
that I have met.
Yep.
But yeah, that's still a lot, I think.
It is. It's a tremendous amount. And that's incredible. The norm would be 0, maybe 1. And you think this is one of the most important things in our life of how we're functioning. It's our closest relationships. And we have no one around us that we think is doing it well, that we can ask, how are you doing this? And that kind of goes to this idea of asking too. What did we ever do before Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever anyone is using these days? Like you had to call someone, right? Talk to another human. I mean, the first time I made a turkey, I had to call my mom and say, like, how do you do this? And that's the thing. Even I think about in college, I studied abroad for a year and I studied in Spain because I had a Spanish teacher, Mrs. Brinkman. Hello, Mrs. Brinkman, if you're listening, that would show us every year. Like she went to Mexico, I think in when she was a student, so she'd show us pictures of Mexico and different architecture and talk about things. And it was like we learned things from people. So I learned from Mrs. Brinkman through her eyes and through her experience, like the Hispanic culture. I learned that you can't plug in the curling iron overseas. And like she borrowed me her little charger adapter at the time. So we learned things. We've had this history through humanity of leaning on wise people that have gone before and learning and passing down traditions. Right now, we talk about isolation being one of the biggest mental health, factors, but we're not plugged into people anymore. We're plugged into things. And so it only makes sense. If you think about anything like how to do something, how to fix a car, we weren't like putting something on YouTube. We have to know a person and know a person
Yeah.
that can tell us how to do that. And so I know it sounds basic, but it's generationally especially when you're working with like the 20 somethings, like their whole upbringing and understanding and experience is like so traditionally different than people that are like 10, 15 years even older than them. So I think getting back to the isolation is getting back once again to the basics in relationship and plugging into those basics as well.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come easy anymore. You got to find it. You got to dig, you got to dig deep, whether it's, joining a church, getting involved, doing anything, I don't know, something in the community, volunteer, a 12-step program, all of these things that like have a kind of a built-in social network. We've got to plug into those things, those structures, because it doesn't come as easy and the social connections are different. So it takes more effort, but once again, it's super important.
It's so important. And I found that when I moved across the country in 2016 as a nurse, I didn't know anyone. I had to start completely over and I was isolated for a period of time. But the bright side is I got to know myself a little bit better and I started to let go of a lot of relationships. And from that place, the relationships in my life today are a little bit different, actually, a lot different. So as we grow, we have to be willing to let go of things that don't serve us anymore. And I also wanted to just touch on I'm a biohacker, so are you. I love all these things,
Okay.
but I think that we're so out of touch with nature and there's no billboard for the sun or for great sleep or anything like that, unless it's a medication. So many of the most valuable things are free. And biohacking is really to just fill in the gaps for where I'm disconnected from nature. And so a lot of people say, I don't have the money to have a red light or something like that. But nature gives us what we need and we're just disconnected from that. So I think that is when you said get back to the basics, to me, that really means nature as well.
Absolutely. And I love all your talk on the sun. The sun,
Yeah, it's
the
huge.
sun, the sun, the sun. It's huge. If a person doesn't feel so good, take 5 days of 30 minutes, get in the sun, get direct sunlight on the body. You tell me you don't feel better after 5 days of doing that.
Yeah.
The sun is huge. We are like little solar powered, batteries ourselves. We need to be recharged. Okay. The sun is one of the recharges for our human solar batteries. Relationships is another recharge for our human solar batteries. So part of it is when we're feeling down and we're feeling like crap, we just got to figure out, what source of fuel do we need? What is low? And
Yes,
sun, sun is key.
definitely. I mean, I just went to Mexico because I'm like, if I don't get some sun, I'm going to lose my marbles. And it was so amazing and grounding in the beach and just all of that. So the more connected we are to nature, I think the more that we thrive. And I love to fill in the gaps. I have hair extensions. Like I love to get dressed up, but what is really nourishing me is a connection to something greater, my connection to the people around me, and my connection to myself, the purpose. Why am I here? Which is more of that spiritual question of, I also believe that we are spiritual beings in this physical vessel and we're here to learn lessons at soul school. And that helps me not, I don't want to say not take it so seriously, but just say, what's the lesson here? And that makes me not look at it as good or bad. I'm just learning all the time. You mentioned that in the beginning. You're a learner.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely it's definitely a journey, and it's a journey where we can play around and have fun and try different things. Like, you're like, I love that you're honest about you have hair extensions, but you're the high maintenance hippie. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm really honest, Ashley. I haven't washed my hair in 3 weeks. I've done this homemade shampoo.
Wow.
I'm trying, it's like, who cares? Just do, whether it's a coffee enema or if you're using baking soda and apple cider vinegar to wash your hair it doesn't have to be so serious. I mean, and that maybe is a little biohack too. So it's like you get to play around. You can have some fun. You can live
Yes.
life outside the box a little bit and deprogram some of the programming and get back to the basics. But the biggest thing is when, and I'm sure you feel like this in coaching as well, it's when you see people get their wins. It is
Yes.
so exciting to see sometimes how just a little bit of progress, a little bit of change can cause such big wins. That's really the key.
Yeah. In wrapping up, there are so many amazing topics that I still would love to go through, but just for time's sake, what do you think is something that is a really powerful takeaway for someone for living their best life mentally and physically? What types of beliefs do you think, or practices, or just what would you tell a person in general who is on their way to living their best life, taking their power back, being their own advocate? What might be a really powerful reminder for them?
First and foremost, you can always get started now. Sometimes we feel so overwhelmed and hopeless. And so you could start tomorrow, you can start today, you can start an hour from now. Everything that's ever been part of our history is part of our story and our journey, but it doesn't define us. And so the cool part is the sun still comes up every morning and we can choose differently, we can do differently, we can be differently. We're not, I guess if I could do anything, it would be like if I could press an easy button and like, you know, give someone a supplement or not an injection, but something, it would be belief that there is hope and a knowingness that things can be better and things can change. And if I were to start with anything, it'd be like, oh, I'm a little bit teary right now, but
Me too. It makes me tearful because it's
I
so
just
true.
I just wish that is so deeply embedded and ingrained in my heart and from my journey, my personal journey, that first and foremost, I would just say that there is always hope. We've got to start there. Then next it's the basics. And I didn't and last but not least, it would probably be friends. I think about if I had to tally all of the words of wisdom that I've gotten that I utilize in strategies and counseling, I don't want to undermine my degree, but was it from the book or was it from maybe a friend of mine or a mom or a neighbor or whatever it might be? A lot of the advice and strategy I lean on is from that wisdom. So my third point would be go out and find your person, friendship, partner, whatever it is, we're all weird. Go find another
Mhm.
weird. Go find another weird like you. That's
Yeah.
that. So that would be my advice. And then have some fun, play around with some biohacking. It's always enjoyable to do that. Everything from the red light to the sauna to the PMF mat to
Yeah.
King Tom in the morning or whatever it might
Mhm.
be. Hey, I took my little supplements to reduce everything before, keep the mood in check and reduce some anxiety I had. Um, and just realize it's a journey.
Yeah. I think fun is also really great advice because I used to think that took away from my success. But when I'm so rigid, I don't know that that was serving my health. So I'm learning to prioritize my relationships, change the story in my mind. Like I don't have to be who I've always been, neither do you or anybody else. That's why I'm so transparent about things that are not so fun to say. But if I can change, so can someone else. And takes radical responsibility and commitment to ourselves, but it is so possible and so worth it. And I also love, owning your weirdness. I mean, I felt like a closeted weirdo for so long, and I have 8,000 people that have taken my coffee enema course. Like there are people out there like you, but we're never going to find them if we're hiding at home. Hopefully they don't come find us at home. So, just owning ourselves and realizing I won't be for everyone. And that's okay. And that has brought me so much peace versus how can I contort myself to make everyone like me? Well, that didn't even work anyhow. So letting go of that has been life changing.
And I'm going to end, I don't know where you want to end, but this is going to be my last little piece. It's going to be everybody loves a comeback story, right?
Yeah,
All rooting for the comeback kid, the comeback story. Nobody freaking likes a perfectionist. Nobody likes a know-it-all. Nobody likes the one that their life seems like untouchable. Most people kind of like behind, closed doors are like, don't like that, right?
very
So
true. Yes.
strive for that. Everybody's rooting for the underdog, the comeback kid, the hero of the story. And so that's what's been so beautiful. And we all have the comeback story inside of us. And part of therapy is tapping into that as well.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you for being here today. I so appreciate you. And how can people find you and work with you if they're interested in connecting with you?
Awesome, great question. Well, easiest is, and maybe this you'll inspire me to be a little bit more on Instagram. So my handle, Kim the Counselor on IG, is one. I don't post a lot, but I'm going to start. Second would be through Psychology Today. I have a profile there. It leads to my private practice. It'll lead to my phone number, website, and all of that. So if you want to do Psychology Today, we're under a little construction. I told you before the session or before our time started that we're trying to start to grow. So things will be unfolding in the next 6 months and such, but Psychology Today is the easiest place to find all of those updates.
Amazing. And what I respect so much is that I do feel that you respect people's autonomy. I don't think that we would have been in contact for this long if not. And that is so important to me. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing and the perspectives that you shared today. And I think we both got a little teary at the end because it's so important to just feel and connect. And I appreciate you so much. So thank you again for being here today.
I appreciate you inviting me. Thanks again.
Thank you for listening to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and leave a review, ideally a 5-star review if you loved it. All of this is free of charge and really helps me to be able to run the podcast. If you take a screenshot and tag me, I'll repost you and shout you out on Instagram. So tag Ashley Taylor Wellness and High Maintenance Hippie podcast. If you have any feedback or guests that you'd like to have, I would love to hear from you so that I'm not just talking at you. I really want to deliver things that are valuable. So send me an email with any feedback, suggestions, or ideas for guests at ashley@ashleytaylorwellness.com. And I will leave you with a disclaimer. Please know that this is not medical advice or replacement for seeking medical care. Everything discussed on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. Always consult with your medical provider before making any changes. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.